Playing the drums and singing.
You're listening to Rip'n Common Sense Radio.
That's right, where we take you well into the midnight hour with our special Art Bell Archives show happening tonight and every night this weekend, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. Tune in as we open up the Art Bell Archives and dive into the lost classics of a vocal treasure. We take a look at those stories and we bring them up to date and we share them with you. We ask for your input and your shout-outs, your call-ins, as we go through the most amazing stories ever told. Tune in tonight and every night as we reinvestigate the Art Bell Archives live.
The Art Bell Archive Show.
Rip'n
7 p.m.
Rabbit Hole
Pacific,
is a
10/9
community-driven
Central.
radio.
Rip'nCommonSense.com.
At times, the community comments may reveal prejudices and other beliefs that we or our sponsors do not condone. Views or opinions expressed by the community, callers, or guests are those of the individual speaking and do not represent the views or opinions of this site. Rip'n Common Sense content is intended for mature audiences only. Enjoy.
The captain has turned on the seatbelt sign.
Good evening and welcome to another episode of the Art Bell Archive live show. I'm your host, AJ, the Rip'n Rabbit. Give yourselves a round of applause for being smart enough to be here. Tonight we dive down deep into the rabbit hole and dust off an archive subject in an unusual way. Effigies of North America and the world. Culture of the mound builders. In our Hidden Earth episode tonight, you're going to learn about a mysterious civilization that occupied time and Earth here in North America. A forgotten civilization that rivals other civilizations from around the world. We're going to take a look at the mound builders tonight, Sunday, December 15th, 2019. Now, the man we're going to talk about tonight is Charles Teague. And Teague grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, and always had an interest in North American archaeology, which is something we have an interest in here as well. It wasn't until one night in the early 1990s, listening to radio host Art Bell, who was interviewing an American Indian shaman, that his interest became almost an obsession. The shaman was telling this story about how this Indian who had come to him while he was doing some exploring, the Indian took him to this place back in the backwoods to what he calls a hall of records under a mountain. The shaman told Bell this Indian guide showed him temples and 10,000-year-old artifacts under that mountain, but he didn't know the location. He went on to say they were blindfolded until they got there, so he couldn't get back to it. Teague said that he knew approximately where it was. At that time, Teague was enrolled in a course on reverse speech technology, which we actually covered in a previous show a couple weeks ago. So Teague recorded the program to see if he could use reverse speech to find any information of this hall of records. And he says he was amazed at what he found. It's just too weird for normal people to understand, Teague said. I recorded it and said, hell, if this son of a bitch really went to the Hall of Records in Middle America, in reversing his mind, it was going to reveal and tell him where he went. So after 3 hours of listening to that part of the program over and over in reverse, he pulled out words, some intriguing, others curious. He said, near the fault in America, in the forest in the mountains. Teague said it was in the New Madrid Fault. It couldn't be anywhere else. The New Madrid Fault line runs through Mark Twain National Forest, which overlaps the Ozark mountain range. Then he caught words like cactus and lake and lizard, which didn't mean much. He said, what is a damn lizard? It didn't make any sense. He said most of it didn't make any sense, but there he was, only 100 to 200 miles from it. So Teague began to look over maps, but really kind of got fed up and felt screwed, so he just left it alone for a while. Now, it wasn't until he attended a presentation on historical American peacemakers that the mound crept back into his thoughts. So, for the past 10 or 15 years, the mysterious Mystery Mound located in the Midwest has been spinning up curiosity amongst those locals. According to the websites, it's known as a hall of records of sorts. But the question is, for who made it? The Native Americans? Perhaps the creators are even more ancient than we think. For those of you who are not familiar with the local story, the Missouri Mystery Mound is a man-made mound in the ground with a series of interconnected passages underneath a section of the Mark Twain National Forest in central Missouri. Now, the story of the Mystery Mound and Charles Teague, an archaeological enthusiast, and how he constantly searched for the Holy Grail in mid-America. when he heard this particular local Native American shaman being interviewed by Art Bell, like I said, in the early 1990s. It's a story that's captured the attention of treasure hunters, archaeologists, Native researchers, and of course, the natives themselves. And tonight, it captures our attention. The shaman continued to tell Art Bell throughout the program that he was showing temples of 10,000-year-old artifacts, and of course, blindfolded, so he can't access them. And that's when Charles Teague began his hunt. And using his knowledge and using the technology through the reverse speech, he felt like he broke into some clues and literally made it his mission to find this Hall of Records, this mystery Missouri mound that was hidden in earth. And he was resilient, and he wasn't going to give up. And he, rightfully so, was looking in the right area because, as we know, that area was very dense in Aboriginal population. Now, I loved the Indiana Jones movies as a kid, and I love the search for hidden earth objects, including underground caves, passageways, effigy earthworks and mounds, intaglios, rock art, and petroglyphs. Any evidence that ties us to that lost ancient civilization that was so obviously present here in North America really intrigues me. And we did an episode, I think last week or the week before, on the horned giants, which was the topic of the Baraboo Man Mound. And as we discuss the mound builders further in the program this evening, we're going to hear more about how that culture affected Wisconsin and how the mound builder culture of Wisconsin could very well be connected to this mysterious Hall of Records in the Mystery Mound of Missouri. Because as we know here at the Rippin' Rabbit Hole, all of these subjects are in some way connected. And what is the connection to literally thousands of hidden mounds in North America?
So essentially, and this is just one, all these little dots here that are kind of across the whole Mississippi and Ohio and Great Lakes region.
Now, we've included the graphic in tonight's show notes listed in the link below.
These are just the ones that are from the Hopewell period. So it's not that there's plenty more from after that and things like that. So these are just some of the mound sites. And so essentially in the 1800s, when European Americans in the newly independent United States Republic crossed the proclamation line that the British king had prevented them from crossing in terms of settlement, and began to kind of pour into the Ohio River Valley and started settling, they immediately realized there were all of these mounds everywhere. And they found them all over the place, and actually they immediately began destroying them. And so one of the things that happens, is so they don't exist to anywhere near the kind of numbers. Some of the most impressive ones have been preserved, but largely farmers just immediately started breaking them down and plowing and things like that. So in a lot of cases, they're all lost.
Now, that is a sad reality here in North America, that in that period of time during the 1800s, that these fantastic earthworks, in some case burial mounds, in some case effigy mounds, in the shapes of lizards, kind of like what Teague had uncovered in his reverse speech, in the shapes of birds, and as we know from the man mound episode, and even in humanoid figures. And these were everywhere. So if you can imagine, as the prairie lands of Wisconsin and the Mississippi and the Mississippian area was being developed in the 1800s, you can imagine what we've lost, and that really is unfortunate. Now, we have a bright side to that, and the bright side is that we haven't lost everything, and a lot of things have been wonderfully preserved, places like Cahokia, which we're going to hear about in just a few moments. So when Teague set off to explore the Mark Twain National Forest looking for the Hall of Records, he wasn't that far off in his thoughts, given the understanding that this was a very populated area. And how we understand the population and the concentration is based on the amount of arrowheads that are found in a particular area. Let's listen to what's been uncovered in Teague's own backyard in Missouri.
This is, as far as I know, an Osage campground. They came here yearly, and their arrowheads and flip points are just all over the place. If we plowed up that field and got a good rain, there'd just be arrowhead points all over the place. When we put our first garden in here in the early 80s, I tell people that I couldn't get any seeds stuck in the ground without throwing flint points out of the way first. They're just all over the place. So we're not the first people to live here, and we want to leave it low impact, and we just want to be so careful to have our dwellings, have our permanent cabins in places that aren't going to detract from this natural treasure and wonder. I was sawing a tree right across the river, and as I set my chainsaw down, there was this perfect little arrowhead right next to where I set my chainsaw, and no telling how that arrowhead got there. You know, usually you find broken ones. There's a writer, a journalist, Henry David Schoolcraft, that traveled this river, I think it was 1811, soon after the Revolutionary War. He was checking out Missouri's lead mines in Arkansas, and he tells about the Indians were gone mostly by then, but he would find these white settlers that had come over the mountains from Kentucky just living as hunters and gatherers, hunting the game and then moving on to other plentiful areas to hunt.
Now, it is largely accepted that a lot of these earlier people were very nomadic and never stayed often in one place. And in some cases, these burial mounds served as graveyards for their ancestry, but not always. And just how old were they?
Local archaeologists and historians believe Native Americans may have inhabited this area as early as 8,000 to 12,000 BC. Now, let's fast forward to today. If you drive through Dames Park, eventually you'll run across a strange mound by the lower football fields. This oval-shaped mound is believed to be one of the oldest ancient Native American mounds in North America.
Well, we were doing a survey of the Peru Creek. We got a grant from the National Park Service that's administered by the State Historic Preservation Office here in Missouri. And part of that grant was to look for places before all the development and that was going in. It's back in 1984, I believe, we got the grant. And so we were doing surveys of selected portions along Peru Creek. And we came across this area here and was surveying it, and we looked at it and it was like, wow, this is a mound. And what you find on it are prehistoric artifacts as well, pottery that dates to about 2,000 years ago. So that tells us the mound's probably about 2,000 years old.
Recently, O'Fallon's Historic Preservation Commission decided to look into further preservation of this site.
Certainly anything historic that involves the city of O'Fallon, the O'Fallon Historic Preservation Commission is obviously going to be interested. So it was a natural thing for us to be drawn to the Indian mounds and try and better understand the history of the mounds and if there's any sort of preservation effort that is required to protect it for future generations. It's believed that this is probably the only intact mound of the late woodland time period is still in existence. So that in and of itself makes it quite interesting to be worthy of preserving and studying.
Ancient mounds can be seen throughout North America. Each mound served a specific purpose for their people.
The mounds at that time were used predominantly for prehistoric burials for the leaders of societies. And the mounds were not only a place that they were buried, but they also served as a place of community pride, just like the arches for us today. Having a mound on near your site reflected how important and influential your village was. So they were usually put in prominent places that you could see, like this spot here on the floodplain of Peru Creek.
These earthen structures are the key to unlocking our ancient past. And there could be possible uses for O'Fallon's ancient mound in the near future.
These kinds of places are draws from around the world. People in other countries are greatly fascinated by American prehistory. So having something like this is a great asset to the community.
The fact that this mound is probably the oldest human site in the city limits of O'Fallon, that almost by definition makes it worthy of understanding and worthy of preservation. So I think O'Fallon has a lot of history, and we're just now beginning to understand it.
And it's not just O'Fallon and Missouri. Of course, this is going to stretch all up and down the Mississippi. So it goes all the way up into Canada and all the way down into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, the date range that you've heard in that clip there, to me, I see evidence in Wisconsin alone that goes back 11,500, in some cases even 14,500 years ago, with the Mastodon kill site in Racine, Wisconsin. So again, we're talking about a very early period of time, a time before some of the rest of the world's remarkable architecture and structures weren't even here yet. Okay, so our earthworks that we have almost obliterated can rival those of the world's. And the evidence in these mounds is that they're about 2,000 years old. And the common school of thought is that the mound builder culture was present during that particular time frame, about 1,000, 2,000 years ago. However, we're learning today new things about our own planet, new pieces of land hidden on Earth.
That it encapsulates, I think, this worldview of the early 19th century with the European Americans who have come up with this, racial ideas about civilization, and specifically they fit into that then their prehistory of the Americas, where they've assumed now, because they've found these vast mounds, they assume then that there must have been some previous, not just civilization, but race, an entire different group that built the mounds, who are then afterwards exterminated by savages, essentially on the same kind of principle as the Europeans would have called them, the Tartars, like the Mongols, when the Mongols sacked Baghdad and that sort of thing. In other words, that kind of idea in terms of their idea of history and civilization.
Now, like I said, I believe that this was a span of many, many years, and that these mounds had been repurposed as generations moved through time. Just like there's a city sitting on top of Cahokia in St. Louis today. But perhaps more intriguing is what they've discovered in Antarctica.
There are absolutely no reptiles or amphibians here, and all land mammals are brought exclusively by humans. There's been no rain here for almost 2 million years, but at the same time, 80% of the world's freshwater reserves are stored here. Antarctica, the coldest and probably the most mysterious continent on the planet. Over the past century, humanity has studied its surface quite well, but we all know that what's most interesting is usually hidden deep beneath. When scientists decided to look under the ice cover of Antarctica, what they saw there surprised not only ordinary people like me, but also the researchers themselves. So what is hidden deep beneath these huge sheets of ice? For a long time, scientists have believed that under the immense thickness of ice, there's nothing particularly interesting. At most, maybe some small, scattered pockets of subglacial groundwater. However, the expectations that researchers had in the 90s have been exceeded. As it turns out, under the ice of Antarctica, there's a whole lake, and it's also quite large, about 5,800 square miles, or 15,000 square kilometers.
Now, just hiding under the ice. So, folks, the Earth is full of hidden secrets. There isn't any question about that. And if the ice can push Antarctica's landmass down below it, and it just remains hiding below the ice, what secrets there are to be told in that part of the world, let alone our own backyard. As we get into the second half of the program tonight, we're going to discuss those civilizations. We're going to look at those trade routes. We're going to discuss perhaps potential thoughts behind these effigy mounds and why they were there, what purpose they served, and continue to learn all we can. But we're not going to learn it all tonight. This is definitely going to be a subject we're going to continue and do many, many episodes on in the future. But we are at the bottom of the hour, and I do need to take a quick break. So we're going to do that and then come back with our Hidden Earth here on Rip'n Common Sense Radio. We'll be right back. Don't touch that dial.
You're listening to Rip'n Common Sense Radio.
That's right, where we take you well into the midnight hour with our special Art Bell Archives show happening tonight and every night this weekend, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. Tune in as we open up the Art Bell Archives and dive into the lost classics of a vocal treasure. We take a look at those stories and we bring them up to date and we share them with you. We ask for your input and your shout-outs, your call-ins, as we go through the most amazing stories ever told. Tune in tonight and every night as we reinvestigate the Art Bell Archives live.
The Art Bell Archive Show, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, ripandcommonsense.com.
Now, over the course of the weekend, we've had a giveaway opportunity for our listeners to receive an origami lamp designed by Robert Lang from our friends at Heron Elite. The giveaway and the submissions are now closed. So if you haven't sent your photo as of right now, then you are no longer eligible to send a photo in. Now, we did receive several submissions, and the way that the request was we asked you listening to send us an email of where you would put this fantastic lamp. Now, this is a very unique, very cool lamp, and I can tell you, if you look at the link in the show notes below, and you visit our friends Heron Elite, and you see this lamp for yourself, you'll very quickly understand just how cool it is. And I can tell you, it was a very tough decision for us because there were several places where the lamp would look real good in your home or in your space, as some of the submissions turned out to be. So I can tell you, it was a difficult decision for us because we received several great places where this lamp would look fantastic. And I can tell you that we narrowed it down to 2, and it was a tough decision, which I didn't want to make. So our friends at Heron Elite have agreed to break the tie and have 2 winners. So a big shout out and a big congratulations to our listener, Samantha. You are a recipient of the origami lamp from Heron. I will be emailing you. We only did receive 1 Samantha request, so you should know who you are. I won't read your last name. And our other listener, Christopher B. Christopher B. from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Now, I'm going to post, once they've given me the permission, the 2 photos that these 2 individuals sent to us so that you can see at home the difference between the 2 photos and why we had such a tough decision and ultimately why we declared it a tie and gave 2 lamps away. So to those individuals that submitted that didn't win, I apologize. We're going to have another chance to win again coming up real soon, and perhaps you'll be able to get your hands on a Heron Elite origami lamp from Robert Lang. Now, if you are still interested in the lamp, you can find this lamp for sale on Amazon, and it will arrive before Christmas. But a big shout out to Christopher B. and Samantha R. for winning an origami lamp. And now the contest isn't over, or your work isn't over. We want to see the lamp set up and on in the places you submitted. That'll come up soon. Either way, we're going to take care of your shipping. I will be emailing you after the performance for your address. If you'd like to send it to me in advance, please go ahead and do so. Both of your lamps will ship out tomorrow, and we'll provide you via email a tracking number, and hopefully you'll have it before Christmas. So thanks for playing. Also, a big thanks to Heron Elite, our friends at heronelite.com, for providing that fantastic giveaway for those 2 lucky winners. And I got to say, we received several fantastic submissions. And bracket style, we started eliminating them down to these final last 2. And we've spent the better part of the last day really analyzing both of them. And finally, Heron just agreed. Let's call it a tie. So congratulations. Now, before we broke, we were talking Hidden Earth. And Teague, who heard the shaman on Art Bell describe this mystery mound in Missouri to where the Hall of Records existed underneath. And perhaps this instilled something of an Indiana Jones quest for Teague. And Teague and his wife and daughter drove from Tennessee to Missouri and searched a small section of the Mark Twain National Forest. And in 100 degrees, he went in a circle back into the woods and walked around to try and find it. They spent most of the day going back into the swamps, and they literally found nothing. After one fruitless day, They just went home, but Teague wasn't finished. And that's the resilience. And I think it was Biz Woofer who said earlier in the chat that there were 2,000-year-old arrowheads found right in the urban area of where he lives. So this is mind-blowing to think about, is what he says. Hi, Granoff. I see you as well. And not only is it mind-blowing to think about, but you can understand the obsession and why Teague and his entire family were searching for this underground mound, hall of records. But he was resilient, and one day you're not going to find it. That's a huge area. And he goes back to his home in Tennessee. He grabs his brother, a few more friends, and they make continued trips back to Missouri and back to the Mark Twain National Forest. In fact, it took several trips with his brother and local Native Americans. But ultimately, Teague believes he found it. He goes on to say, "We found a circular path, and as we were walking back along this long gully, my brother said, 'Hey, look up at that rock formation. It looks like a lizard.'" And that was what he was looking for, a lizard. One of the words that he had recorded off of Art Bell's show when the shaman was speaking, and reversed it to hear lizard. Now, I'm fascinated by the giant bones found in these mounds all over the United States as well. And we are going to do a show just dedicated to the giant skeletons as well as the miniature skeletons that have been found too. Because the hidden earth is full of artifacts from ancient civilizations that perhaps aren't even ours, not even of this planet. And as we've heard this week in the Mission Osiris episode on Thursday night and last week's Planet 9, it's a high likely chance of what was said just before we went to the break, that perhaps there were several races of existence here in ancient civilization and our prehistory that we know absolutely nothing about. And yes, the Smithsonian, as we'll get into in some of those upcoming episodes, our research will show you that there has been enormous cover-ups, not just from the Smithsonian, but this kind of information, because it's considered fringe and it goes against the grain, is what is suppressed. But with this alternative media and with YouTube and with these types of live broadcasts, we have the ability to bring this stuff back up. And that's what Art Bell was famous for, was getting the bridge between, the fringe and academia. And I think, as we are about to hear, that this stuff has a common Moneybag says Smithsonian Institute or institution. It's another Mandela effect, perhaps. I just go Smithsonian Moneybag 73. We are constantly being told that the mound builders existed at a particular time that is very early. And if we listen to Antarctica and we understand, it just broke in the news today, that underneath the ice, there is all this, I'm sorry, not today, but this week, there's all this extra water, there's all this extra land, and it's been pushed farther and farther and farther down below the ice. So this is millions of years, theoretically, of the Earth being pushed down. And that's what we know to be true about any archaeological dig. When you start to go down, you're going through the layers of time. So it's logical for me to think that the occupation periods of these mounds that we're finding here are absolutely repurposed through time, including the existence of some of our huge cities like St. Louis. So we're going to listen now to Cahokia, which is a fantastic preserved mound. Not the entire city. This ancient city was the entire St. Louis area. And as we know today, the buildings and the urban occupation of that area has destroyed over 90% of this ancient city. But in the area of Collinsville, where Cahokia is preserved, there's a wonderful cultural center there that explains exactly what that civilization was and what they were doing.
Since the glaciers receded, the rich lands of the Mississippi River Valley have always attracted mankind. Here cultures grew and evolved, each borrowing from the previous, eventually culminating in a new civilization archaeologists have named Mississippian. Hello, I'm Jim Wilhelm. This is the center of what was once the largest city in North America. Today we know it as Cahokia, sometimes called City of the Sun, and it might also be called the pinnacle of the Mississippian culture. Located at the confluence of three rivers, whose waters provided both food and transportation, Cahokia reached an estimated population of 20,000 people by 1150 AD, which was larger than London at the time. It was a city complete with suburbs, plazas, and markets. Now keep in mind that there were many permanent Mississippian settlements scattered throughout North America, but this one was by far the largest and most influential. Most of the population lived in small thatched huts arranged in family neighborhoods. Rising over the huts were a number of mounds, some used as platforms for the homes of the elite, a visual reminder of the city's social order.
So they had a social class system. They had a social order to what they were doing. This was not a nomadic group, like we talked about before the break, where generally it's accepted that this culture and this civilization was very nomadic, moved around, never settled down. Meanwhile, let's build a city up on this fantastic ancient city that rivals some of the ancient civilizations around the world, almost every one of them. And when you take those radiocarbon dates that go back 11, 12, 13, 14,500 years ago, okay, where did the story go wrong and why? And as Moneybags points out, the Smithsonian, there's a Mandela effect there apparently. And they're definitely an institution that throughout the discussion of these gigantic skeletons that we talked about, this is something that, and I'm going to have to look it up, but I think that there was a term for it. I think it was the difference between diffusionism and separatism. And right around the 1830s, I believe, 40s, maybe even the 1850s, the Smithsonian as an institute changed their mind on what they were supporting as far as ancient civilizations here in North America. And I believe that they went to the separatist system. I'll have to look this up, don't quote me, and I'll add it in the show notes when I find it. But I believe that the diffusionism was the thought of the trade routes, and it was the thought of diffusing their own network of their societies along those trade routes that they started to embrace. And then somewhere around the time that these skeletons were being unearthed from these mounds in Wisconsin, which we're going to talk about, the dense concentration in Wisconsin, which is enormous and unbelievable, of native Aboriginal existence. We have to take this into consideration in today's thoughts, because these mounds are hiding in plain sight. They're hiding right under our own feet.
The city included 120 mounds, of which 80 remain today. That was the largest and grandest of them all. It was the city's center in more ways than one. There lived the chieftain, who was both the ruler and the spiritual leader of the population. It covers more than 14 acres and rises in 4 terraces to a height of 100 feet, making it the largest prehistoric earthen structure in the Western Hemisphere.
The largest prehistoric earthenwork structure in North America, Monk's Mound in Cahokia. Imagine all the dust in the huge boxes of collections across this nation of bones in those shelves from those skeleton and skeletal remains they have hidden away. You're absolutely right. That's an excellent point. Because it's not just in Missouri. Okay, it's not just across the Mississippi in Illinois. And it's not just in Wisconsin. It is in Ohio. It's in Michigan. And I think in the show notes tonight, I put up the map that they were speaking of so that you could see those different points. But again, it's the periods of occupation. And in those dusty shelves, in those boxes hidden away that contain skeletal remains, there are also tools. There are fish hooks. There are Clovis points. And as we've discussed in previous episodes, the Clovis first theory is being challenged in 2019. As we look at the peopling of America, the evidence of this earthworks and these earthworks that are hiding in plain sight tell the true stories. But here's the issue. You can't get in them. You can't dig in there. You can't dig down. There are the laws that prevent you from doing that because the preservation is important to us. But so is that archaeological study. So I really think that we are coming into a new age here in 2020 where things will be clearer. With 2020 vision, we will start to see the golden age of discovery. That's where we're headed. And as we are entering into 2020, with the breakthroughs in technology, with the very clear connections of these rabbit holes to all of these subjects, from reverse speech to hidden earth to Mandela effect to anti-gravity to Planet 9, we are coming upon a grand era of discovery. And between 2020 and 2030, those 10 years are what I consider to be the golden age of discovery. So let's hope that's true.
Core samples indicate that varying textures of soil were used to assure proper drainage. Just imagine, for hundreds of years, generations carried baskets of dirt from huge borrow pits to make this mound. The work began before the Vikings discovered the New World and was finished just after the Second Crusades.
Now think of that span of time. Think about that as your family's dedicated heritage and lineage. Well, Grandpa was a mound builder. His grandpa was a mound builder. His grandpa was a mound builder. And we've been carrying these baskets of earth to that mound for over 350 years. And we liked it. When I was your age, we had to carry buckets of earth to the snow, through the snow to the mound. I mean, come on. It's not too far off. But that's exactly how these mounds were built, especially mounds like Monk's Mound, where it was the high chief lived up there because he was closer to the gods. He had the ability to speak, and he was separated in his class, which I think is, obviously restores that social order of exactly how their culture and their civilization functioned. But let's look at how this lines up on that planetary celestial level. Because also, and keep in mind, this is just across the river from where the mystery mound in Missouri was found. This is Cahokia, and just outside of St. Louis in Collinsville, Illinois, there is this Monk's Mound. And they predict it took 350, 400 years of people carrying baskets of earth every day to build this. So it's a mega structure. It's not just a hill. But you would not know that looking at it. And again, the celestial planning that took place, the astrological thought process that was at play here, is present in most of these remaining sites around North America. There is some sort of calendar importance. And as we spoke to Alfredo on our Horned Giants episode, dealing with the Baraboo Man Mound, we heard of the calendar stones and the importance of the calendar stones. And just outside of St. Louis, where this sits, and right directly next to the Man Mound, is a fantastic circular structure called the Wooden Stonehenge. Take a listen to this.
In 1961, while excavating a site for a proposed new highway, archaeologists discovered what has since been called the American Woodhenge. Set in a giant circle were 48 treated cedar poles, a solar calendar used to chart the seasons and to determine the planting and harvest times. In fact, at the beginning of each new season, the rising sun lined up with a specific pole. The calendar was aligned so that during the all-important spring and fall equinox, the sun would appear to rise directly over the chieftain's mound. This was quite fitting since, as you'll recall, he was known as the brother of the sun. Eventually, it was discovered that over time there had been 5 such circles, each larger than the previous, and each time the number of poles increased by 12. Why 12? And why increase the size? It's just another mystery of Cahokia.
So again, the number 12 being the complete number, as we heard in our Triskaidekaphobia episode. The significance of the circles perhaps is what was drawing Teague to what he had come across when he went searching for the Hall of Records. And he claims he found that circular path, and that's what led to that lizard. So when we look from the air, which unknown to us today in 2019, the people even 1,000, 2,000 years ago that were occupying these mounds, during that period of occupation, they had no way to view these things from the earth. And they were gigantic lizards with gigantic tails. They were gigantic birds. They were in the shape of animals. So they're not just always burial. They're, very set designs, panthers, beavers. And this is the same type of imagery that we find in petroglyphs and rock art across North America. So there's a connection between the images, as we heard in that Horned Giants episode from Alfredo. And that connection could be much deeper than we actually are giving it credit for, especially when we look at the symbolism of humanoid figures, like the Blythe Integlios and the Man Mound in Baraboo. Now, Monk's Mound, for the high priest who sat atop, or perhaps priestess, because we do know that there was a value to women chiefdom in certain times and certain periods of the occupation of Aboriginal peoples in these areas. So that was reserved for the higher ups and the elite, while the conical mounds often were used to bury, and that's where treasures would be buried, kind of like the pyramids. And thank you, Granoff. I appreciate that. That's very kind to say. And in the pyramids, when the kings and the pharaohs were wrapped and mummified and put into their sarcophaguses, they were often adorned with these treasures. And as we find in a straight ley line up from Cahokia into Wisconsin, there is a mini Monk's Mound in the area of Aztalan, which was a palisaded city, ancient city, that there is conical mounds on that zone where they have the Princess Mound, and she was part of that chiefdom. And when she was buried there in Jefferson County, Wisconsin, she was buried with seashells, thousands of seashells. Now, there's not a sea anywhere close to Wisconsin. And these weren't freshwater Great Lake shells. These were seashells. She's literally littered in that mound with thousands of seashells. So when we look at those deposits of arrowheads and tools and artifacts, that Aboriginal population seems much more sophisticated in its trade routes when we hear of things like the Princess Mound in Wisconsin with thousands of Floridian seashells. Now, Wisconsin is known to have the greatest concentration of Aboriginal artifacts and effigy earthworks in the entire North America. And there's a reason, because those trade routes followed that Mississippi for generations prior to the Mississippian culture. And we know that those trade routes were first documented by the first people who came through in the 1600s and explored that Great Lakes area. And when you look at the design of Cahokia, and you look at the design of Aztalan, and you think about the artifacts that have been found in that area, connected to the Aztalan, Wisconsin site, is a little-known rock art site that was discovered in the 1980s. And it's known as the Hensler and Yelk sites. And there is radiocarbon dates for these two sites, which are just outside of Aztalan, that go back 11,500 years. In one case, suspected 12,800 BP. And from other areas in and around Wisconsin, we get much earlier dates, more recent. So where you have the largest concentration, you also have the largest discrepancy of occupational periods of time in these dates. People are very quick to say Aztalan is 1,000, 1,200 years old. But again, it's that repurposing that brings it it takes it much farther back, without question. And we're going to do an episode on the Hensler site all by itself, because there are so many fantastic topics here on the hidden earth. Is going to have many parts to it. Because like I said at the beginning of the show, there is no way we can cover it all in one show. And it is a little mind-boggling when you start to think about the cover-ups. And again, I look at that Smithsonian, I look at the story of these gigantic skeletons, and I start to put weight into the celestial events and the calendar stones that we just heard about at Woodhenge, where when you can find these alignments, you can then find direction, which is interesting that these ley lines, that's a whole nother show, always fall on where these spots are. From the Blythe and Teglios to Aztalan to Cahokia to perhaps the mystery mound that our friend Teague has been searching for. And we know that there have been ancient mounds that have turned up great discoveries in other places of the world, but we will find many, many answers to the things that we're questioning tonight in the next 10 years. And that's where these types of discoveries and these types of enthusiastics doing their independent research, I top hats off to them. Because he says they ascended the hill and they found caves with ancient carvings. One Teague calls the wall. He was certain he found the location of the Hall of Records. The main thing was the wall with the giant skull carved into it. Teague said that it had that carving of the ancient god, the planet Saturn. There was an entrance there, but they did not open it, or they were going to be dead, according to the superstitions and the legend. That's where you have to draw your lines. When you start entering caves, like Indiana Jones learned, that's when you start to hit the booby traps. I think there's going to be archaeological discoveries made in the near future that will change the scientific big brown bear, big brown bug. That's what happens when you don't drink any water. We will view our history in a completely different way, Grenoff. I completely agree with you.
To unravel those mysteries, archaeological work continues. This is Mound 72, one of only 6 of this type of mound here at Cahokia. It's called a ridgetop mound. It was originally excavated in the early 60s, but recently it has been revisited. To everyone's amazement, Mound 72 actually covered 3 smaller burial mounds. And inside one of those was found the remains of a possible chieftain, laid to rest on a bed of 20,000 shell beads, plus the remains of 6 of his retainers. In another section are the remains of 300 people, more than half of which were young women who had been sacrificed. Interestingly, some of the bodies were found not in the mound, but under the mound, using the mound itself as a grave marker. Now keep in mind when visiting, not all the mounds here were used for burials. Most were used as platforms for raised buildings. And this type of burial was only for the elite. Common folks were buried in the ground outside the city.
Common folks were buried in the ground outside the city. And that's exactly what they did back then. You'll see the earth is littered with hidden secrets from Antarctica to Canada. and the North Pole. Perhaps we'll learn one day this Earth is hollow. Perhaps we'll learn one day this Earth was crawling with giants, a completely different race. All the answers to those questions regarding this planet could very well be hiding in plain sight right underneath a city near you. Definitely a lot of fun. A big shout out to our listener, Christopher B., who's already emailed me his address for his Heron Elite lamp. He says, I am so thrilled I won. We are too, Christopher B. Thank you for your submission. Wow, there's a lot hiding that perhaps we'll never get the answers to, and people have been searching for quite some time. Now, we did some research into the treasure hunters, and I just want to follow up with you that the Knights of Golden Circle and Treasure Hunter Net, and I'm going to post a link to this in the show notes tonight, does have information about the Holy Grail, Knights of the Golden Circle, ancient cities, and an interesting story of quote-unquote something to be found, where they mention the Missouri Mystery Mound and the lost ancient civilization in southern Missouri, and Charles Teague, and a giant face, and how people tried, like the National Geomantic Survey Society from Kansas, tried to get a letter of agreement and a contract signed with Mr. Charles Teague to remove his website and form a research partnership that allows the NGS to control Charles's narrative of the story. And Charles specifically stated that he would not sign that agreement because he didn't think it was appropriate. He felt that since the site was in a national forest, anyone could do their own investigation. Of course. And that's rightfully so. Of course, not the law. So I'm going to post a link to that treasure hunter site, as well as some Wayback Machine links that I found to Charles's website that he had back then regarding, which has now since been removed. And we're also going to link to the Facebook group that we found. And we perhaps even found Charles himself. And if that's the case, we're going to have him on. We're going to do an interview with him about his mystery mounds. Hey, give yourselves a round of applause. Thanks for being here. Bizwoofer, Moneybags, Grenuff, all of my listeners on Rip and Common Sense Radio. Thank you. I appreciate you. Well, folks, we did it. We spent another Sunday night together, and we're just getting started on the topic of Hidden Earth, a topic we're going to continue for many, many, many episodes to come as we move into 2020. We'll return again next weekend, starting Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday evenings, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. We'll post our schedule at rippandrabbithole.com on Wednesday, so make sure you visit us there. If you haven't subscribed to us on YouTube or haven't joined up at rippandrabbithole.com, you can do that. It's a fantastic community over there. All of our episodes and archives are there and available on demand for you. So please be my guest to explore the rabbit hole deeper. A big shout out to my 2 winners of the Origami Heron Elite Lamp by Robert Lang. I'm going to be emailing you just after the show ends now. And hopefully you can get me your address before the shipping has to ship out tomorrow. I'd like to get it off to you so you have it before Christmas. Anyways, to all of you, wherever you may be, good evening, good morning, good day, whatever the case might be. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'm AJ, the Rippin' Rabbit. Take care of yourself and each other. Good night.
He tries to hide his very loneliness under a big head 'cause he wants to be incognito. You try to talk to him, you see him disappear. Oh, they call him Mr. Rabbit. Oh, simply Mr. Rabbit. You've never seen such a creature like this, a human body and a rabbit face. Oh, they call him Mr. Rabbit. Oh, Mr. Rabbit.
Once there was an old man living in an old house down by the lake. Rumor says the man was hunting for rabbits just for fun. Since the day the rabbit disappeared for a while, then came back and cast a spell over the old man. So he looks like a rabbit too now.
They call him Mr. Rabbit. Oh, simply Mr. Rabbit. You've never seen such a creature like this, a human body and a rabbit face. Oh, they call him Mr. Rabbit. Oh, Mr. Rabbit. Mr. Rabbit. They call him Mr. Rabbit.
You're listening to Rippin' Common Sense Radio.
That's right, where we take you well into the midnight hour with our special Art Bell Archives show happening tonight and every night this weekend, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. Tune in as we open up the Art Bell Archives and dive into the lost classics of a vocal treasure. We take a look at those stories and we bring them up to date and we share them with you. We ask for your input and your shout-outs, your call-ins, as we go through the most amazing stories ever told. Tune in tonight and every night as we reinvestigate the Art Bell Archives live.
The Art Bell Archive Show. 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. RippinCommonSense.com.
Now, one of the things Art Bell would do on a regular seasonal routine was something that he called yearlies. We're coming up on 2020, and we're going to have a special New Year's Eve show that's already in the works and being planned for you. And here's how you can be a part of that show. Art Bell used to do seasonal predictions on New Year's Eve. And we're asking for your predictions for 2020 and the future. What do you think will be happening in the year 2020? Do you think you can make a prediction? More important, can you formulate it in 30 seconds or less? Now, if you visit rippinrabbithole.com, on the bottom of every page is the little red microphone. the ability to send a shout out. You can record up to a 30-second message there, one every hour. We'd like to hear your New Year's Eve predictions for our New Year's Eve prediction show. And in true Art Belt style, we will go through and log them next year as a tradition here at Rip and Rabbit Hole, just like Art would do. We're going to find out which ones are a ding and which ones are a bonk. It's going to be a lot of fun for that show, and it wouldn't be possible without you. So visit ripindrabbithole.com and send us a 30-second on-air shout-out on your New Year's Eve predictions. And we'll see next year how many of them come true.
But he could not control his lust for meat. Say she left the streets for greater glory. But others said that she was big with child. Whatever was the truth.
Indeed, it's very real.
Last time he was seen was by the pawn shop. He traded 2 gold teeth for a sack of corn. And he would plant it on the outskirts of the city as a warning that he would someday return. He said he never found her and he's still looking. It is said he searches rivers for some sign. But the truth is that he caught her down in Georgetown with a Spaniard who had left his wife behind.
And Talk Radio.
If I was in charge of naming a planet, I might pay tribute to Nikola Tesla and name it Nikola.
Just want to say thank you to Ripon Common Sense. It's a really nice area for news to read. There's a little something for everybody. I just enjoy it. I've been doing it for a couple weeks now, and it's really nice. Thank you.
Fun fact of the day. Did you know running was invented in 1748 by Thomas Running when he tried to walk twice at the same time?